John Fletcher's morning began like any other. Cool air brushing against his weathered face, the golden sun lifting slowly over the horizon, and the scent of earth freshly tilled in the fields surrounding his property. This was his sanctuary, a small but thriving farm nestled within the quiet bounds of an HOA community that most outsiders would call idyllic. To John, it was home. His barn stood proudly near the edge of the property, filled with decades of memories and the tools of a life shaped by hard work and honest sweat. But today, something was wrong. As he stepped out from his farmhouse, John's gaze locked on a flash of gleaming red metal, blocking the narrow dirt lane leading to his barn. It was Karen's Porsche, bright, polished, and impossibly out of place among the golden fields and rusty farm equipment. The sleek curves of the sports car mocked the rough textures of John's world. His heart sank. The Porsche was parked dead center in front of the barn door, its pristine tires pressing into the dirt. A silent blockade. John's mind raced. This wasn't the first time Karen had parked without regard, but today it felt deliberate. A cold certainty settled in his chest. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was a message. John pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed Karen's number. The line rang once, twice, before a clipped voice answered. "Karen, it's John. Your Porsche's blocking my barn. I need to get my harvester out." There was a long pause on the other end before Karen's icy reply came. "I'm in a meeting, John. Park somewhere else." Park somewhere else. The words stung more than John expected. He swallowed his frustration. The barn wasn't just some extra space, it was the heart of his livelihood. Without access, the harvest would be delayed, crops might spoil, and months of hard work could be ruined. John's neighbors started to gather, drawn by the tension. Mrs. Patel from across the street whispered to Mr. Green, "That Karen, she's always looking for a fight." The hushed murmurs only fueled John's unease. Everyone knew Karen's reputation, the self-appointed enforcer of HOA rules, wielding her clipboard like a weapon. But this was different. This felt personal. He watched through the cracked barn window as Karen's Porsche remained unmoved, gleaming defiantly in the morning light. John's gaze drifted to the harvester parked behind it, a massive machine, silent and still, powerless as long as the car blocked the path. The air thickened with anticipation. John's mind replayed every interaction with Karen over the past months. Her petty complaints about his tractor noise, the endless letters about property violations, the way she'd glare whenever their paths crossed. Was this the final move in some personal vendetta? Or a calculated play to push him off his land? Minutes stretched like hours. John's fingers clenched into fists as he weighed his options. Call the HOA? They'd likely side with Karen. She was on the board and well-connected. Call the police? They'd see it as a private dispute. The barn was his life's work, but Karen's stubborn refusal to budge was a blockade he couldn't simply bulldoze through. Just then, Karen appeared at the edge of the driveway, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and unyielding. She smirked. "I warned you, John. Move your equipment." John swallowed the anger burning inside him and met her cold gaze. "I need to get through, Karen. This isn't just about rules, it's my livelihood." Karen's smirk deepened. "Your livelihood doesn't trump the community's peace. Rules are rules." The neighbors held their breath, sensing the clash was about to explode. John's jaw tightened. This was no longer about parking. It was a quiet war, one that could destroy more than just a car. As Karen turned and walked away, John's eyes narrowed. A seed of determination took root. He wouldn't let a Porsche stand between him and his barn, not without a fight. But little did he know, this battle was about to become far bigger than a blocked driveway. John's thoughts churned as he stared down the gleaming red Porsche still squatting in front of his barn. The machine behind it, the harvester, was silent but ominous. a sleeping giant blocked from doing its job. Each minute that car stayed put was a nail in the coffin of this season's harvest. His frustration simmered, but he knew he needed a plan sharper than brute force. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the HOA's iron fist, and she wielded rules like weapons. The morning sun climbed higher as John stepped back into his house trying to think. Calls to the HOA office had yielded nothing but polite dismissals and vague promises. Karen's influence was evident. Her complaints always made the board jump to her defense. This wasn't going to be a simple parking dispute. It was a silent war, and John was caught in the crossfire. Outside, neighbors kept their distance but whispered behind curtained windows. The community was divided, some quietly rooting for John's independence, others wary of Karen's strict enforcement. John knew the subtle fear in their eyes. Karen had made it clear, cross her, and the rules would fall hard. Determined not to lose everything he'd built, John took the harvester's keys and climbed into the cabin. The engine growled to life, vibrating beneath him like a beast waiting to be unleashed. But there was no way around the Porsche. The driveway was too narrow, the car too perfectly placed. John tested the harvester's controls, inching forward, cautiously, but the barrier was absolute. He stepped out, heart pounding. Just then, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. Be careful. Karen's not just blocking your barn. She's planning something bigger. Watch. You're back. His pulse quickened. Who could this be? A neighbor? A warning from someone who'd seen Karen's darker side? Before he could respond, Karen's voice cut through the air like a knife. She stood at the edge of the driveway, clipboard in hand, watching him with that smug, cold expression that made John's skin crawl. I've reported your tractor noise again, John. Next time, there'll be fines. John's jaw tightened. You're targeting me. What do you want, Karen? Her eyes glittered. I want peace and order, something you seem incapable of respecting. The words stung, but John's mind raced. Peace and order? Or control and intimidation? He'd seen Karen rally the HOA board to freeze his permits, block his equipment, upgrades, and now, with the Porsche, trap him in his own yard. It was a power play. John's frustration gave way to a slow-burning resolve. He wasn't just fighting for his barn anymore. He was fighting for his right to live and work in his own home, and he wasn't alone. That afternoon, John knocked on doors, quietly gathering neighbors who had stories of Karen's ruthless grip. Mrs. Patel, whose garden was constantly scrutinized, and Mr. Green, who'd had fines slapped on his mailbox for non-compliance, joined him. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing frustrations and fears. The community's silent war was deeper than John had imagined. Karen's tactics were subtle but relentless. Flyers appeared around the neighborhood accusing John of reckless farming, disturbing the peace, and even risking property values. The rumors spread like wildfire, isolating John socially while trapping him physically. Late that night, John lay awake, the weight of the day pressing on him. The mysterious message echoed in his mind. Someone knew more about Karen's plans, but who? As the moon cast long shadows over the fields, John realized the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just a neighborly quarrel. Karen's vendetta threatened to ruin everything he held dear, and now a secret conspiracy was lurking just beneath the surface. He glanced toward the barn, where the Porsche waited, silent and immovable. Tomorrow, the war would continue. But John's quiet defiance had already begun to stir something fierce in the community. The question was, how far would Karen go to crush it? John woke before dawn, restless and unsettled. The previous night's mysterious message gnawed at him. Be careful, Karen's not just blocking your barn, she's planning something bigger. Who could have sent it? And what did they know? That he didn't? Determined to find answers, John slipped quietly from his house, careful not to wake his wife or the neighbors. The cold morning air bit at his skin as he made his way toward the edge of his property, where the HOA president's house stood, a grand, perfectly manicured home that screamed order in a neighborhood built on compromise. From the shadows, John watched as Karen pulled up beside the president's porch in her Porsche, the headlights cutting through the fog. He crouched low, heart hammering, as he saw them exchange a thick envelope. Documents slid from Karen's hands to the president's without a word. The president nodded solemnly. John's breath caught. This wasn't about parking or petty complaints. It was something bigger, something secretive. Back home, John rifled through old paperwork he'd collected over the years, looking for any clue that connected Karen or the HOA to a larger plan. His eyes landed on a faded map of the neighborhood, marked with property lines and zoning changes. Something about it felt off. The next day, John's suspicion was confirmed when a letter arrived from the HOA, an official notice stating the board intended to revise the community's zoning regulations. The changes would reduce farmland usage, limiting equipment size and imposing new fines on any agricultural activity deemed disruptive. If passed, it would choke John's farm operations and force him to sell. Why now? And why target him specifically? John's gut told him Karen was behind it. Her obsession with community standards wasn't about peace, it was about control, and maybe something more personal. He couldn't shake the feeling she wanted his land, or worse, wanted him out entirely. To find more, John reached out to an old friend, Sarah, a local journalist known for digging into HOA corruption. Over coffee, he laid out his concerns. Sarah's eyes narrowed. HOAs can get ugly, John, especially when money and power mix. If Karen and the board are plotting to take your land or silence your farm, there could be legal and financial tricks involved, loopholes, backdoor deals, maybe even fraud. John's mind raced. Could Karen be using the HOA as a front for something illegal? The thought made his skin crawl. Meanwhile, Karen seemed to escalate her campaign. That evening, John found new flyers plastered around the community, accusing him of reckless farming, property damage, and threatening neighborhood safety. Someone had been spreading rumors, poisoning the well. The neighbors' eyes, once filled with sympathy, now flickered with doubt. Some whispered that John's equipment was too noisy, too disruptive. Others feared angering Karen, whose influence ran deep. John felt the walls closing in. One late afternoon, as John tended his fields, he noticed a shadow moving near the barn. He spun around and caught sight of a figure slipping away. Someone had been watching him. The message from before echoed again. Karen's plans were not just bureaucratic. They were personal and dangerous. John's frustration simmered, but beneath it a slow-burning resolve grew. He wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever. As dusk settled, John locked the barn and stared. Out over his fields, the red Porsche still blocking his path like a bold challenge. He knew the silent war was entering a new phase, one where the stakes were no longer just property lines or parking spots, but the very survival of his farm and his legacy. And lurking behind Karen's cold smile was a secret that could change everything. The next morning dawned heavy with unspoken threats. John felt it in the stiff breeze that swept across his fields, and in the cautious glances his neighbors cast his way. The war waged quietly now beneath the surface, but the tension was palpable, like a gathering storm waiting to break. John knew Karen's grip on the HOA was tightening. The zoning changes threatened to cripple his farm, and the rumors Karen spread were poisoning the community's trust in him. Yet amidst the growing isolation, John refused to stand down. He had to fight back, not just for himself, but for the neighbors who quietly suffered under Karen's iron rule. He began by knocking on doors one by one, seeking allies in the shadows. Mrs. Patel, the gentle woman with a garden always under Karen's microscopic scrutiny, listened intently. She admitted Karen had fined her twice over minor infractions. Mr. Green, the retired mechanic, recounted how Karen had demanded he remove his classic car from his driveway because it didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Karen was weaponizing the HOA rules to control and intimidate. But the allies were cautious. "If Karen finds out we're talking, she'll come down hard," Mrs. Patel warned. John nodded, understanding the risks. Fear had silenced many, but not him. In the days that followed, John and his small group of supporters met in secret. They shared stories of Karen's petty tyrannies and devised a plan to expose her influence. They would gather evidence of the HOA's misuse of power, document the unfair fines and zoning abuses, and present a united front at the next HOA meeting. Meanwhile, Karen's campaign intensified. John noticed new "no trespassing" signs cropping up near his barn, clearly aimed to intimidate him. One afternoon, as he worked the fields, a stranger approached, camera in hand, claiming to be a new resident. But the cold glint in the man's eyes told John he was more likely a spy, sent to report back on his activities. That night, John received another anonymous message on his phone. "They're watching. Be careful who you trust." His nerves frayed, but his resolve hardened. The community's silence was breaking, and Karen knew it. John's wife, Emily, worried about the risks he was taking. "This isn't just about the farm anymore, John. It's turning into a war." He nodded, but reassured her. "If I don't stand up now, we'll lose everything." As the date for the HOA meeting loomed, John prepared meticulously. He gathered photos of Karen's Porsche blocking the barn, copies of unfair fines levied against neighbors, and testimonials from those willing to speak out. It was more than evidence. It was a call to arms. On the eve of the meeting, John stood by his barn, staring at the red Porsche still sitting stubbornly in place. It was more than a car now. It was a symbol of Karen's control. And he knew the coming day would decide whether the community could finally reclaim its voice or be silenced forever. As the moon rose high, John felt the weight of the coming battle settle on his shoulders. The gathering storm was no longer just a metaphor. It was real, fierce, and ready to break. The morning of the HOA meeting arrived under a gray, restless sky that seemed to mirror John's growing anxiety. The streets buzzed quietly with tension, neighbors whispering behind curtained windows, their eyes flickering with both hope and fear. This day wasn't just a routine gathering, it was a showdown, a battle for the soul of the community. John stood outside his barn, the harvester humming softly beside him, ready but trapped behind the infamous Porsche. The red car gleamed, defiantly, a silent challenge daring John to act. Every minute it blocked the barn door was a countdown to disaster. The harvest couldn't wait. Crops were ripe, the season slipping away like sand through his fingers. He checked his phone. No new messages, but the warning from earlier days echoed in his mind. "They're watching. Be careful who you trust." Trust was thin here, thinner than ever. Neighbors started to gather at the community center where the HOA meeting would take place. John spotted Mrs. Patel, Mr. Green, and several others from his secret group, their faces drawn but resolute. For the first time in months, there was a flicker of solidarity, but the air was electric with uncertainty. Inside the meeting room, the atmosphere was charged. Karen sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, clipboard ready like a shield. Her eyes locked onto John with the cold satisfaction of a hunter who believed her prey was cornered. The meeting opened with the usual formalities, but tension thickened as John was called to speak. He stepped forward, voice steady but fierce. "This isn't just about parking or noise complaints," John said, glancing around at his neighbors. It's about fairness, respect, and the right to live and work in our own homes. Karen's actions, blocking my barn with her Porsche, pushing zoning changes, spreading rumors, are an abuse of power. Karen's smile tightened, and she fired back. John is reckless. His equipment damages property values and disrupts our peace. The rules exist for a reason. Voices murmured on both sides. John felt the weight of every skeptical glance, every whispered doubt. The battle was as much for hearts and minds as it was for land. Then, the HOA president announced a surprise vote to approve the new zoning regulations, exactly what John had feared. The room buzzed, but just as the vote began, the doors swung open. A small group of neighbors stepped in, carrying stacks of documents and photos, evidence John's allies had gathered in secret. Mrs. Patel spoke up, her voice trembling but clear. These fines, these complaints, they're selective, targeted harassment to push out certain homeowners. The room shifted, whispers turned to gasps. Karen's composure faltered, her mask cracking under the weight of exposure. But just when John thought the tide might turn, a sharp voice interrupted. "I have new evidence," Karen declared, pulling out a printed report. "John has repeatedly violated safety codes and environmental regulations. His farm equipment is a hazard." The accusation hit like a thunderclap, casting doubt once more. The room was a powder keg, ready to explode. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting sharp light on the tense faces inside. John's pulse thundered as the vote approached, each second stretched taut with suspense. Back at the barn, the Porsche remained unmoved, a symbol of the silent war that had spilled into the open. The breaking point had come, but the outcome was far from certain. John clenched his fists. Whatever happened next, this fight was far from over. The tension inside the community center was thick enough to choke on. Karen's damning report hung, in the air like a guillotine blade poised to fall. The neighbors shifted nervously in their seats, whispers buzzing like angry bees. John's heart pounded in his chest. Every eye was on him, every breath held tight in anticipation. Outside, the red Porsche still sat arrogantly in front of the barn door, blocking John's harvester like a sentinel. Time was slipping through his fingers. The harvest waited for no one, and the crops were ripe, threatening to rot if he didn't act soon. John's phone buzzed with another anonymous message. "Tonight. You have to make your move." A cold chill ran down his spine. He glanced at Karen's smug expression across the room. She was playing a dangerous game, but John had reached his breaking point. The silent war had to end. As the HOA chairman called for the vote, John made a decision. He excused himself and left the meeting early, ignoring Karen's sharp protest. The growing crowd in the parking lot watched as John strode purposefully toward his barn. The harvester's engine roared to life beneath his hands, a primal sound echoing across the fields. John gripped the controls, adrenaline surging. His fingers trembled, but his resolve was ironclad. The Porsche gleamed in the early evening light, innocent and impervious, but no longer untouchable. John pressed forward slowly at first, testing the boundaries, the harvester's massive wheels crunching on the dirt. Karen's Porsche was immovable, but it was a machine, and machines were built to move obstacles. The crowd gathered on the sidelines, breath held, as John pushed harder. The harvester lurched forward with a grinding force, its wide tires sinking, slightly into the soft earth. The Porsche's driver's side mirror scraped against the harvester's steel frame, a sharp, nerve-wracking scrape that made the gathered neighbors flinch. John's heart hammered louder. The harvester inched closer, each centimeter a defiant act. The crowd's whispers swelled into murmurs of shock and awe. Some gasped. Others exchanged worried looks. Could he really do it? Was this a reckless move, or the bold stand they had all been waiting for? Then, the harvester's massive front blade nudged the Porsche's bumper. The red car shuddered but did not move. John's breath caught. The harvester's power met resistance, but John pushed again, a slow, grinding shove that carried with it years of frustration and fury. Suddenly, the Porsche gave a reluctant shudder and began to slide forward, creeping inch by inch away from the barn's entrance. The crowd erupted quietly in disbelief and cheers. Karen appeared at the edge of the driveway, her face a mask of fury and shock. "Stop! You'll destroy my car!" John didn't answer. He kept pushing, the harvester's engine roaring like a beast freed from its cage. With one final shuddering lurch, the Porsche rolled off the path and came to rest on the side, its glossy paint scratched but intact. John climbed down from the harvester, his hands shaking but victorious. The barn door was clear. The harvester was free to work. The neighbors surrounded John, some clapping quietly, others whispering prayers of thanks. The silent war had reached its breaking point, and John had taken the first decisive step toward reclaiming his farm and his life. But as he stared at the Porsche, scratched but stubborn, John knew this was only the beginning. Karen's cold. Eyes burned with fury, and John sensed the final, most dangerous phase of their conflict was about to begin. The scratched Porsche sat on the edge of the driveway like a wounded beast, its red paint marred but its menace far from broken. Karen's fury was a living thing, radiating off her as she glared daggers at John from across the yard. The crowd had dispersed, some whispering encouragement, others shaking their heads at what they called reckless defiance. John's chest still heaved from the adrenaline of the harvester's showdown, but beneath his triumph simmered a cold unease. Karen's eyes weren't just angry, they were calculating. He had pushed her into a corner, and corners bred desperation. Back inside his house, John's phone buzzed again with another anonymous message. "They're going to come after you. Next, watch your back. Trust no one." The words echoed louder than ever. The next morning, John found tire tracks circling his barn, deliberate, aggressive, a clear warning. His harvester had been tampered with overnight, a vital hydraulic. Hose slashed, the machine rendered useless until repairs could be made. Someone was sending a message, and John was the target. With neighbors avoiding eye contact and the HOA board silent, John realized he was isolated, but not broken. Determined to fight smarter, John turned to Sarah, the investigative journalist. Over coffee, she shared a revelation that shook him to his core. "There's more here than just HOA disputes," she said quietly. "Karen and the board have been quietly negotiating with a developer interested in buying large plots for a new housing project. Your farm's location is prime. If they can push you out, the land's value skyrockets." John stared in disbelief. The fight wasn't about community standards or order. It was about greed and deception. Armed with this knowledge, John and Sarah began digging deeper. Sarah's contacts uncovered internal HOA emails, revealing covert deals and kickbacks. Karen was at the center, her influence extending beyond parking disputes to backroom dealings that could strip neighbors of their properties. Word leaked out slowly, stirring the community. Some neighbors were shocked, others were angry that Karen had played them all. But Karen wasn't done. She launched a public campaign painting John as a troublemaker, endangering the neighborhood's future. Flyers, social media posts, even a staged accident involving farm equipment made John the villain in the public eye. John's family felt the pressure mounting. His wife Emily pleaded, "Maybe we should just sell. It's not worth the fight." But John's resolve hardened. "This land is our home. I'm not giving up." Late one night, as John reviewed the evidence he and Sarah had gathered, a shadow moved outside his window. A faint click, the sound of a camera shutter. Someone was spying on him again. The The silent war had turned into something far darker. John knew the final battle was coming, and this time it wasn't just about a Porsche blocking a barn. It was about survival, trust, and exposing the truth, buried beneath years of lies. As dawn broke over the fields, John stared out at the horizon, feeling the weight of the fight ahead but also a flicker of hope. The community could still rise, united against the corruption, and Karen's reign could end, but only if they dared to face the storm together. The day of the final HOA meeting dawned bright and tense, the air thick with anticipation. John stood at the edge of the community center's parking lot, clutching a thick folder of evidence, emails, photos, and witness statements carefully compiled by Sarah and himself. The entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Inside the meeting hall, Karen sat confidently at the head of the table, her poised smile masking the storm brewing beneath. The developer she'd secretly allied with had made it clear they wanted John's land, and Karen's influence was their key. But John was ready. As the meeting commenced, he requested to speak first, commanding the room's attention with a quiet authority that silenced even Karen. He laid out the evidence piece by piece. The secret emails exposing Karen's collusion with the developer, the falsified complaints against him and others, the attempts to intimidate and isolate dissenters. His voice was steady, each revelation landing like a hammer. The room grew restless, the whispered doubts among neighbors turning to shock, then anger. Karen's mask slipped, her confidence cracking as the HOA president's face paled. He had been kept in the dark about Karen's backroom deals. Just when it seemed Karen would try to regain control, the doors burst open, and in walked the local sheriff, flanked by deputies. They carried a warrant for Karen's arrest, citing charges of fraud, intimidation, and corruption. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Karen's smirk faded into stunned silence as she was handcuffed and led away. The community was left reeling, but hopeful. John's allies rallied around him, promising to rebuild trust and transparency within the HOA. The developer's plans for the neighborhood were halted pending further investigation, but the biggest surprise came after the meeting, when Sarah handed John a sealed envelope she'd found tucked away in the HOA's archives. A letter from the previous HOA president, now deceased. In it was a confession, a warning about Karen's ambitions, and a plea for future leaders to protect the community from those who would exploit it. John realized then that Karen's vendetta against him wasn't just personal. It was a desperate bid to cover her tracks before her plans unraveled. As John stepped outside into the warm afternoon sun, he felt the weight of the battle lift. His barn was free, his harvester ready, and the community had found its voice again. The red Porsche, it was gone, moved quietly in the night, a silent symbol of a war finally over. But John knew one thing for sure. Peace in this neighborhood would never come without vigilance. And he was ready to lead that charge.